want to give you a comparison of size here. This is Mercury, Venus, and Earth. We can sort of see are the inner planets. Here's the moon. This is Mars in comparison. Look how large Jupiter is. So if Nibiru is as large as Jupiter, no wonder it's a giant. I mean, it's huge. Even if it was as large as Saturn, you can put I think it's either 300 or 600 Earths in Saturn itself. And then this is, of course, Uranus and Neptune. Here's Pluto. And so in this drawing, they've got Nibiru the size of about Saturn without the rings. But if it's really the size of Jupiter, that's pretty darn large. Again, this is the comparison here. Here's our sun. This is probably a low mass star, the size of that. So maybe Solaris is this size, maybe Solaris is this size. Here's Jupiter by comparison, and here's Earth. So, you know, again, pretty large. No wonder the beings are larger than we are. This is another picture here. Nibiru in this picture is, you know, pretty big. It's about the size of Jupiter. And then the dark star. So this is actually from Google Sky, and it appears to be, you know, either we have planets around a dark star, or we have Nibiru with at least 4 satellites around it. Okay, we began tracking Nibiru in 1983, and a lot of people didn't think Nibiru was here, but I think that it is, and I'll show you some evidence for that. Google was told to deliberately black out where it was coming from, and so you would literally go on Google and find these big black things to not show us where it was. And this was all approaching, you know, this is 2000. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, coming up to 2012. So from 2007, it could be seen from Antarctica, which is why the largest telescope observatory in the world is down in Antarctica at Nourumea Station. This is it being seen next to the sun at dawn from Australia in 2009. You can see it rising with the sun. Once the sun comes fully up, it's hard to see it, but at sunrise and sunset, you can see it. Here it's obviously on the far side of the sun. It's not close. This is Russia 2009. This is Russia 2009. Again, you get a sense of the size of it. This is southern Russia coming up or going down in sunset. Here it is. I can't tell you where this is, but you can see they're a little more even. Here we are again. Now some could say this is a sundog. Maybe it is, but the sun appears to be over here. This appears to be something else altogether. See how the light is coming from here? See, it's lighter over here. The sun's over here. This is something else. This is Croatia, 2011. Absolutely incredible. Now remember, they covered it totally in gold. It has a gold shielding on it. So of course it's reflecting the sun's rays. So although there may be internal heat within the planet, I don't doubt that, the reason it's so bright, it looks like a second sun, is because of this. Is it as large as the sun? No, but it's all about distance. Just like our moon and the sun are not the same, but when we had that solar eclipse, they appear to look like they're the same size. Here we have again. Here we have Palo Alto, California. Incredible. This is China, 2011. Hope you guys are enjoying this. I remember when I first found these images, they were so incredible. This is Devon, England. And I actually, you know, was speaking at these conferences in 2008, 9, and 10, 11. And I was saying, look, Nibiru it's here, it's approaching. And I was on panels where like, oh, no, it's not coming for another 160 years. I'm like, do the research, dude, you know, you can see it. This is incredible. Southwestern England, extraordinary. So totally covered in gold now and reflective, gold from our planet, but save their planet. Proposed path of Nibiru. So there were people like myself that were trying to work out this proposed path and when it would come and if it had anything to do with 2012 and if we were going to have some kind of, you know, difficulties. And of course, depending on where our planet is, if we're over here when it comes around, not a lot of difficulties. And of course, that would be the case. If we're here and we're looking at the sun rising, Nibiru would have to be back behind the sun, right? Okay, that's how it would have to have gone. So, what if, you know, we were over here? when it came by. Amazing. That could really create a lot more problems for us. And so, there's a lot of us that have been trying to work this out. And of course, it would really help if the astronomers and people that really have this equipment and the capacity to look at it could address it with us. And they had their own names for the different planets. You can sort of see they called Earth Ki, Ki. So these comets were linked to periodic destructions and floods and like destruction of Atlantis. And so a lot of people in the ancient world were very scared when these came because they looked at them as harbingers of doom. So let's look at some of the evidence that there were astronauts that were coming here from the planet. Certainly this is one of the Anunnaki. You can see him wearing a cross. It looks like a Celtic cross. So it certainly predates Christianity by tens of thousands of years. You've got the winged disc here. He appears to be in some kind of a, I don't know, elevator or conveyor, chamber, and he's pushing some kind of a button as we would today. The guys wore earrings, by the way. I thought that was kind of interesting. Definitely must have been colder on their planet because they came here with long beards, and after they were here for a while, they shaved them off. This would be Inanna. She's a female astronaut. She's got goggles on, okay, and all sorts of kind of buttons and things like that going on with her uniform. So here are some depictions from the ancient world. Here's a modern astronaut, and these are all ancient astronauts that they have found in various cultures from South America, Central America, and so forth. Here is a modern astronaut with a big old head. Here is an old one, with a UFO in the background on rock. Here's a modern astronaut. Here is a depiction from the Mayan civilization, a totally human. These are not shape-shifting reptilians, they're humans. And then they probably some of them had these big old heads. This is where we get the cone heads, Saturday Night Live, the cone heads. And this is really probably why the wizards wore those hats, is because the wizards were probably combinations between humans and Anunnaki. They were very long-lived next to humans. They were taller, like Gandalf. They were more intelligent. They had more capacity to the brain, and they used those cone-shaped hats, which, later the Catholic Church turned them into dunce hats, but they were originally hats that connotated wisdom. That's what the wizard hat was about. Here we have modern space shuttles. Here we have ancient airplanes. This is from Bogota, Colombia, in South America. There are many of these that have been found. Here we have what appears to be some kind of cylindrical craft with 3 clear beings inside with either, wings or rudders or whatever this is. Here we have the Tree of Life, the Sumerian gods. This appears to be a god that maybe is a god that has on a wetsuit, a rubber suit. It's looks like a fish. So could they shapeshift into mer people? Maybe they just have wetsuits on. We don't know. We're having to figure it out. Again, the same kind of things. Maybe these were the Dogon. The Dogon tribe talks about the fact that beings from the Sirius B system came who could actually go into the water at night and come back. So maybe the Syrians were working with the Anunnaki. Very clearly here, this is great with landing struts. You can really see he's holding the shin. This is in Persia, okay, Darius's tomb or grave. This is a Ahura Mazda, that's who that is, okay. Here we have the space shuttle today, and here we have this incredible, and of course we've seen these 4 moons. If it's Nibiru, it's interesting. It's like the 4 moons that would surround Nibiru. So, you can see where some of our iconography comes from. These are very ancient symbols that have multiple levels of meaning. It's not to discount the current meanings that we've attributed to them, like the cross that Jesus was on, but it's to say that this is like stacked like an echo through time with so many levels of meaning. Here we have what appears to be a beam beaming this dude up to the ship. Okay, I mean, there's like some kind of energy balls and the guy is literally floating in the air as he's going up to the spaceship. Okay, so you can see again how tall they were next to us. The gods created what they call the black-headed ones. In other words, they took a more primitive form of humanity down here. Java Man, Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthal man, and they jump-started our DNA. They brought us up to Homo sapiens, and then eventually Homo sapiens sapiens. And we think Homo sapiens go back at least 200, if not 300,000 years, and that Homo sapiens sapiens at least 40 to 60,000 years, and maybe, as William was saying, 75,000 years. They're larger than us, and this is Demeter and Persephone, and this is a grown human man. So, if he's 6 feet, she's going to be at least 8 feet, something like that. You can see here, we thought they had big egos, but what if, in fact, they were this big and we were this little? So if we're 6 foot, this guy's got to be, I don't know, 15 feet. He's really tall. Again, we can see the Anunnaki here in a prayerful position. And these are not children, because these little guys that were probably the humans have beards, and they're dressing pretty much like the big dudes, okay? So these are human beings that are copying the gods in dress. And look how much bigger the gods were. That's pretty incredible. So same kind of thing here. Same kind of thing here. You can see this is a priest of Naram Singh. This is the priest. This is Naram Singh, it's a king who was probably half Anunnaki and half human. Here, these are Greek friezes of the gods. These are the gods here. These are the humans here. Look at the difference in size. They're at least, if she's, let's say, just for sake of argument, she's 6 feet. She might be 5.5, but then that's going to make this guy twice as tall. So, 10, 11, 12 feet. She's going to be, I don't know, 15 feet. Here we see it again. We see the gods and we see the humans. And this is a regular size hog or pig. That's, commensurate in scale with how it would be today. So they were quite a bit larger than us. And of course, their planet's larger, so that makes sense. And so we are starting to find some of their bones today, and I've given whole presentations. There's a great one that I've done for Neil on giants and elves and fairies, where I just show sample after sample after sample of these large bones and where they've been found around the world. Here's a femur bone that the beam would have to be at least 14 to 16 feet tall, at least. So that's a large bone. Here are some of the footprints from some of these beings. And there's a lot to be said about them, but you can see the difference in the size of their skull and the size of our skull. We could fit about 6 of our skulls into this skull. This guy's bent over. This is a skull. You can literally see this skull is so big, it's his whole body. So, these stories about giants, a lot of these things we think of as myth, they're really all true today. Here's the giant skull found in Scotland. And of course, there have been all these animals. These are stored in Nevada. Some of them, these guys were probably half-breeds. They were what we call the demigods. They were a combination, 8 foot tall with 6 fingers and toes, double rows of teeth, and no incisors. And a lot of them were fair-haired, red-headed. The Anunnaki gods were definitely, a lot of them were blonde and red hair. Again, maybe because they didn't have the intense sun that we have today, so they didn't need the pigment in their skin or the dark eyes and dark hair. These are some of the early ones. When they came down, they had these incredibly large craniums, and this is of course Peru. And here we have Akhenaten's kids, his daughters, and of course Akhenaten, the heretic king who taught monotheism, was among them. This is an artist depiction of probably what they look like, very beautiful, but with these increased skulls. And this is one of the reasons they wore the headdresses, probably to protect and hold those skulls in place. This is a red-headed giant found in the Americas. So these would again been, we have all this religious connotation to calling them Igigi or Nephilim. let's just say these are descendants of humans and the gods together. And Cortez and De Soto and a lot of the early explorers in America, in the Americas, found whole tribes of these, 8, 9, 10-foot beings, and they were very peaceful. They weren't making war on anybody. In fact, we were the ones making war. Here's a whole skeleton with, again, the elongated head. And here we have it in Egypt. So clearly by this time, this skull is smaller than this skull. So over time, as they interbred with humans, or they did not, they grew up on our planet, they didn't have to have as long a heads. And this has to do with the gamma rays that are produced by their planet. There's a low level of gamma rays produced there, which tends to expand the cranium. So if they were raised on their planet, they had the larger heads. If they were raised down here, they had more the smaller heads. In 1846, Joseph Henry, first secretary of the Smithsonian Institute, estimates that there were over 10,000 burial mounds in Ohio alone. That's a lot. 10,000 burial mounds in one state. 10,000, that's huge. In 1972, a mound was uncovered by the Historical Collection of Noble County, Ohio, with the remains of 3 skeletons whose size would indicate they measured at least 8 feet in height. The remains had double teeth in the front as well as in the back of the mouth and in both the upper and lower jaws. Now, why would they want double teeth? Because nature takes care of its own. If you live 100,000 years, you better, have 2 sets of teeth. Otherwise, what's going to happen? Think of us. We live 80 years and we lose our teeth. So, if you're going to live 100,000 years or 20,000 years or 10,000 years or 5,000 years, you better have your teeth. Upon exposure to the atmosphere, the skeletons crumbled. So were they winged beings? That is a very good question. And I don't have the answer, but I want to just show you the painter's evidence in the past. So this is Greek. This is a Greek urn. And, clearly these are human beings that have wings. This is the Christian and Jewish lore. They were turned into angels. But if we go back before whatever, twist happened in the field with the Jews and the Christians and the patriarchal religions, to where a lot of this got reinterpreted in a different way, we can see back to the original sources. Here is a god that has 4 wings, which would be logical to be able to fly. Here's one that has 2 wings. Here are amalgamation beings. This being looks like a lion with a human head, but a pair of wings. This one looks like a griffin. So it's a hawk or an eagle with a lion's body and eagle's wings. Here are early pictures. This is Ninhurta carrying one of his lightning bolts. He looks like he's correcting or chastising or fighting with or chasing this guy. And this little guy, again, lion claws, lion body, eagle's wings. Okay, and here we have the eagle-headed ones, human bodies with eagles' heads and wings. These have been found not only in Assyria and the Mediterranean, but believe it or not, in Ecuador. This is news. It was found in a collection called the Father Crespi collection. And this one is from Ecuador, and it really is identical to the ones we find over in the Mediterranean. Now here are the eagle-headed guys with their mouths open. Maybe he's complaining that the stone is too heavy that he's having to carry. Wah! Wah! Don't make me carry it. It weighs a ton. Okay, maybe that's what's happening here. And here we have the same kind of thing with their mouth open. We normally see them with their mouth closed. But these are beings that have, 4 wings. So maybe they really could fly. And then we have similar statues. This is the one with the bull body. And then, of course, we've seen the one with the eagle body with the human head. So were these creatures that were indigenous to their planet that they brought down here? I think that's probably the case. It's also possible, because they were so good with genetics, that they messed around with genetics. Unfortunately, we got into doing some of this in Atlantis, and really it was terrible. It was a bad thing. So it's quite possible that these beings are native to their planet. When when the people went back from their planet, they took them back with them. So Again, we see this looks like a human being with some kind of a, I don't know, what a dog head or something. You can see the round ears, but we don't have these creatures on the planet today. So were these part of the experiments from the Edgar Cayce talks about in Atlantis, where we began, we meaning humans and extraterrestrials, mixing the DNA of animals and humans, which is really like the GMOs we're creating in our food today. It's a violation of spiritual law. It really is. It abuses the animal kingdom, and then we make these people our servants. And this is what happened in Atlantis, and was one of the reasons why Atlantis kind of wound up having to be taken down. This is a creature we don't have in our world today, but it appears to be a Set kind of animal. A Set was a god, sort of a fire, destruction, and death. He was an egotistic maniac, murderer dude in Egypt who fought Horus. He took control of Egypt for about 350 years, and Horus had to fight him and defeat him. And his his zoomorphic form is a creature that's kind of like this, a Set animal that we don't really know what it is today. But you can see this looks like amalgamation between a lion here, an eagle, claws here, I don't know, a serpent head here. I mean, very strange. Very strange. Here's another one. Here's a bull body and a human torso. So were satyrs and fawns real? Yeah, I think that they really were real. I think that all these things in mythology come out of something that was real. Centaurs and mermaids, yeah. This actually at the university is in Tucson. It's at an art museum. Now, is it one that they found and constructed and they didn't go too public with it so that the powers that be wouldn't come in and take it out? This is extraordinary. This is how the bones of a centaur would have looked. Mermaids, many of you may be aware that there's some very interesting stuff on the internet today with finding bodies that seem to be aquatic on the bottom. And there are certainly evidence archaeologically that our ancestors knew about these beings, a form of human that lives in the ocean, that can breathe underwater. This is a sandstone cave in Little Karoo Mountains in Egypt that shows mermaids. And here we have them, they're fishing with their poles or their spears or so forth. Now there's a dragon, a two-horned dragon fossil. I promised I'd show you this. This is found in China in 1996. It's measuring 7.6 meters long. Well, a meter is about 3 feet, so that's about 21 feet, something like that. Its head is 76 centimeters long. The neck is 54 centimeters long. The body is 2.7 meters in length. So that's 3 meters. That's 9 feet. Roughly, and it is 68 centimeters in width, and the tail is 3.7 meters long. So if we think of a meter as 3 feet, that's an easy way to do it. The tail is 12 feet. So the torso was 9 feet and the tail is 12 feet. So, you know, and there are actually videos out there of flying dragons now. So I think it's possible that some of these things that have been dormant or asleep or suppressed or hidden, you know, they're back in our world today because we're moving into this higher vibration. So then there's the story of the Anunnaki gods having to fight the Titans. So in other words, there weren't just like these 12-footers, you know, the 8-footers, which are the amalgamation, the 12 and the 14 and the 15 and 16, the Anunnaki, but there were all these gigantic, maybe 30 to 50 foot tall. This is a tractor trailer. And this guy looks like he's got a gun. Pretty wild. And here they've taken the gun. Of course, the powers that be, you know, they came in here and did as much as they could to cover it up. So the skull alone is 5 to 6 feet tall. That's really large. And then this one was found in the Saudi Arabian desert. There's also been some found in India that are this large. So there are many different humans throughout the cosmos. We're a 6-footer. Osiris was said to be about 15 feet. But clearly there's some that go up very, very tall, depending on the size of the planet. But the humanoid shape is the classic shape that everyone's made in. Some people have 3 fingers, some 4, some 5, some 6. Some have webbed toes or feet. Some are taller, some are shorter. Some can breathe underwater, some can't breathe underwater. Now, with Egypt, we have just assumed all this time that the pharaohs and the people who built these things just, had the big egos. They had the big head, and they wanted their monuments to be impressive. But is it possible that there are actually beings that are this tall, a 50-foot tall being? And then, here's the Horus, a 15-foot tall being. So it appears that they created a worldwide civilization on this planet for a long time before the Great Flood ever happened. And we're just in the process now of discovering it. And I did an incredible presentation on Atlantis, which is archived on Portal to Ascension. And I actually speak on this, which shows the evidence for many of these places that are being found all over the world. I'm just going to touch very, very briefly on some of this now. So these earlier civilizations were different ages of mankind during the time that Lemuria was up in the Pacific and the time that Atlantis was up in the Atlantic Ocean. And so you can see here the tectonic plates in the Pacific and the remnants of the islands that exist now, Samoa, the Pitcairn Islands from Admiral Cook, or Captain Cook, the Hawaiian Islands. We've got Easter Island in here. This is the Nazca Plain, and this is the Ring of Fire, where there's been so much earthquake activity over in the Philippines and in Japan, down into New Zealand, where Christchurch was destroyed, Australia, and so forth. But this was the original area where Lemuria was, and you can kind of see some of this activity in here. And of course, it went down even before Atlantis went down. Atlantis and Lemuria were up at the same time for a long period of time together. And this is, of course, where we've been having these big earthquakes along the San Andreas Fault, and the Alaska and Chile is down here, where there was a big earthquake in the same area at the same time when Nibiru was passing. Remember, we had like a 9 point something, I think in Chile, and then we had them in Alaska, and we had the Christchurch. We had this whole area, basically. So at one time this was up, or a lot of this was up, and then like Atlantis, it went down in successive sections. With Atlantis, we wound up having it throughout the entire Atlantic Ocean till around 51 or 2,000 years ago, and then it broke up into 5 gigantic continent islands, and then it went down to 3 islands around 28,000 years ago, and then finally around 22,000 years ago it went down to the one really large continent island that we think of in Plato's Legends of Atlantis. And we're finding, this is actually real photography, and I've got probably 50 of these in that presentation. But these are some of the ancient temples that we're finding now under the water with sonar and submersibles and some of our advanced technology. And when we go down, we actually find that they're entire cities. And you can see here from the sonar that this is a step pyramid. So they're being found in the waters around the Caribbean, around Bimini, around Cuba, on the western side of what was Atlantis, and we can also find them in Lake Titicaca. I've actually been to Lake Titicaca, and there's definitely an underwater city there. Under that lake, and of course they found seashells, and Lake Titicaca is pushed way up in the Andes, but what are seashells doing on the beach there? Because it was, this area was pushed up during one of the great geologic changes. Here we can see pyramids that have been completely covered over with fossils and sea shells and so forth that have encrusted them, but they're step pyramids, and these look like entire cities. I mean, it's just quite quite extraordinary. And of course, we found underwater pyramids, and I talk about all this in much more depth. The pyramids are very important because the pyramids were how they harnessed the energy of the earth. The earth is the largest source of energy available to us. It's a very powerful battery. It's got an iron core with a sun at the center. All living planets have a sun at the center. If the core of the planet has died, where there is no heat, then the planet has died. So our Earth has a sun. We call it a molten mass core, but it acts as a second sun. It's not as bright as the sun we have out here, but it's constant. And there is an inner Earth civilization called Agartha. And I talked about that in the Antarctica presentation that I just recently did. This also chronicled with Portal to Ascension, where I talked at length about the inner Earth. But the ancients, the Nibiruians, knew how to tap into the power of their own planet. And so they had built pyramids all over their own planet for energy, to harness the geomagnetic energy of their own planet. When they came here, after enough time passed, they began to do the same thing. They taught people how to do it. They themselves did it. Why? As an energy source. So there are all sorts of pyramids, as you can see, found all over the world. And most people think, South America, Central America, but in Europe as well. So we have Germany, that we found them, European ones, Bosnia, Russia, Turkey, the Canary Islands, Serbia, Slovenia, Macedonia, which is near Greece. Okay, and so you can just see that they're, some of them are covered up. They look like big old hills. Others are more open, and they've actually been excavated. Okay, this is China. China, of course, has been closed to the West for quite a long time, hundreds of years. But now things have become more open, and people have been over there and taken photographs. We've got satellite imaging as well. And again, these are all covered up by land. And in fact, it's the government actually supports people just going ahead and, planting trees or crops on top of them, because they really don't want these secrets revealed. And it's a sad thing, because what I think we would learn is why this worldwide culture existed, not just in Europe and in South and Central America, but throughout even North America. There were pyramid mounds everywhere that were built by the 8-foot, 10-foot, 12-foot tall demigods, basically, who had some of the knowledge passed down to them by their ancestors and sought to harness the energy of the earth. And when we look, for example, at Bosnia, the Bosnia pyramid is, I think, 700 and I think it's 40 feet tall. I mean, that's incredible, when the Great Pyramid of Giza is 450 feet. So the Bosnia pyramid is almost twice as tall as the Giza pyramid, which is extraordinary. And it's covered over, but you can see very clearly, you can see the lines and the indentions. And they've done now sonograms from the air, and this is what it looks like underneath. This is just incredible, isn't it? Incredible. So these pyramids were not built randomly. They were built on ley lines on the earth, creating a worldwide culture. And they were also connected with star alignments, in particular Orion, the Orion system, the Sirius system, the Pleiadian system, the Regulus system, and of course the Pleiades is in Taurus. So it created a worldwide web of energy where we were harnessing the electromagnetic energy of the earth and amplifying it. And this is a picture of that amplification process. Pyramids create naturally a torsion field. A torsion field is the spiral of creation, and everything is built on that template. The golden mean spiral, or the Fibonacci spiral. This is the template that all organic life unfolds within. And so here is Carillion photography of pyramids in action, and how just simply by the shape itself, it generates this torsion field or spiral jetty, okay, that goes around and can be harnessed for power, for electricity, for travel, to power spaceships, to amplify existing ley lines and magnetic, invisible magnetic grids. And this is why pyramids, you know, were put up everywhere in the world, including in Alaska. And this is something that as the snow is melting and the ice is melting, we're just now discovering that there actually were pyramids not only in Alaska, but also in Antarctica. And in my presentation on Antarctica, which is archived with Portal to Ascension, I really go into this in great depth, and how that continent at the time of Atlantis was totally inhabitable. Atlantis was in the Atlantic, but there were cities and pyramids and advanced civilizations in Antarctica. And what happened was a meteor came through, hit the mid-Atlantic ridge. This is why we have a fractured mid-Atlantic ridge, took down Atlantis, but the tsunamis that resulted were so enormous that it caused the poles to shift. All the ice melted, the glacial age ended, and very suddenly the sea water rose about 300 or 400 feet in about a month, which is just unbelievable. And of course, most people perished, the ones that did not escape to safety. And there were said to have been 10 exoduses, definitely Egypt and Central America, South America, the Americans, the British Isles. These are some of the places where some of the survivors lived. But in Antarctica, we have now discovered a city buried under 3 miles of the ice. And this is a very advanced city. This is very hush-hush right now. I would not suggest that you go really looking for this information on the internet. In the process of putting together the slideshow, I went from having no viruses on my computer to 550 viruses, and I almost lost my entire operating system. So the powers that be, there's 7 or 8 countries down in Antarctica now. They're all in a race to try to find the technology and use it for themselves. America's one of those, probably leading the way. They have McMurdo Station, which has about 1,000 to 1,500 personnel there. But they found this city under about 3 miles of ice, and of course they're trying to go in and get access to it. They found 3 motherships, quite extraordinary. They've located at least 3 pyramids that are above the ice right now. You can sort of see very clearly this one and this one and this one and so forth. But believe me, there are more than that down there. I'm sure there are at least 7, if they're not more, because of information I know within the mystery schools. So we're at a place now where it is really, in my opinion, critical for us to not just buy this lobotomy that we have been sold, historical lobotomy 2,000 years ago or 1,800 years ago or 1,700, when the Catholic Church became the Roman Catholic Church. It was really the Roman Empire that decided that they were going to become the Roman Catholic Church. And of course there's a lot of wonderful things that were embodied, I think, in that initial impulse. Certainly they had these great spiritual mysteries. They believed that they were the next generation, or the receivers of this greater wisdom based on Christ's teachings. And if that had really been the case, we'd have a different world now, because Christ's teachings, he was the great aeon or avatar or messenger for our age. There's that one thing's at the end of every age and the beginning of the next age. And his wisdom of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The kingdom of heaven is within. Love your neighbor as yourself. Forgiveness is the key. And the power of love are the things that can change our world into a better place. But unfortunately, that's not what happened, unless you have an organization run by spiritually enlightened people, you have people that become very interested in money and power and sustainability. And how do we motivate people to join our club? If they're not spiritually enlightened people, then, we scare them to death. We threaten them and we get them to join us because the alternative is painful. Whether the alternative is going to hell, where you're saying if you don't join us, your soul will suffer for all eternity, or the alternative is going and stringing people up or burning them or imprisoning them, or calling people that have this deeper knowledge heretics, which is what the church did until the 1200s. And they killed millions of people. They burned libraries. This is why we called it the Dark Ages. It wasn't the Dark Ages for nothing. It was the Dark Ages because knowledge, science, growth, and art all went underground, particularly with the fall of the Neoplatonic movement, which happened around 400 AD. So 312 AD, the Roman Catholic Church gets formed. We had some brief and shining moments in the 300s where there was Pope Julian who honored the Christian and the pagan religions. And then you had Theodosius get in there around, 380s or 390s, and he set forth the Theodosian decrees that ordered the closing of all temples, or the conscription of all temples, because these temples, as William pointed out, were built over ley lines, and they held the power of consolidated energy and hundreds, if not thousands, of years of prayer and communities coming together. And so over the course of about 3 centuries, they took over 500 of these and built big cathedrals on them. And most of these were places that had been dedicated to some aspect of the goddess or the divine feminine. And of course, they just took them over. And the Theodosian decrees basically, literally they inspired the destruction of the Platonic schools that had been going in Greece, that merged Christian belief and thought and wisdom and spirituality with science, with arts, with the humanities, and with the philosophers of ancient Greece and the wisdom of ancient Egypt. The Neoplatonic movement was really an important one. But with the murder of Hypatia was she was a female initiate and a teacher in Alexandria. Her father was Theon, who held the seat of mathematics at the University of Alexandria, which, by the way, had 13 lecture halls and could seat as many as 5,000 people. She was an astronomer. She was a humanitarian, but the Bishop of Alexandria was so threatened by her because she was consulted by the city fathers and so forth. He couldn't stand the fact she was a woman and she wasn't just a Christian, that he inspired these ignorant priests that couldn't even read to go and pull her off her chariot and to club her to death and to scrape the flesh from her bones with oyster shells and then set her on fire. And so with the death of Hypatia, it was the death keel really for those who sought wisdom and knowledge openly in universities and schools. And thus began really about 1600 years of horror. And the Inquisition only ended in Spain in the mid 1800s. That's like 140, 50 years ago. So about 50 million people were murdered in the name of the church. And this has nothing to do with Jesus. It has nothing to do with the beauty and the power of his wisdom and his teachings. When they talk about the great horror that we'll have to pay the price, I think they're really talking about the horrors that have been done by the church in his name. And I was watching a show last night on the Vatican, and of course, I have no doubt that there are many, many wonderful people who have done great things in the name of the churches, helped people, done more relief efforts, really come from that true Christ at heart. But unfortunately, the powers that be, they became very much involved in laundering money for Hitler. They became involved in pedophilia. Over 3,000 priests in our time, in current time, have been censored for pedophilia on young boys, 4-year-old boys and up. And so great things, great wrong has been done in the name of this. And unfortunately, I think the Vatican and the Opus Dei movement with, Cardinal Ratzinger, that became, Pope Benedict, and he's resigned now because he was so much involved in the slave trade with the children and pedophilia. And now we have a new one, Pope Francis, who seems to be a pretty good guy. But unfortunately, they have been involved, the Opus Dei movement, with the protection of the theology of ignorance. For world dominance for a long time. So they've become very much involved with the mafia and the shadow governments. And it's sad because really the church could be such a great force for good. And in some communities, the church is a great force for good. And certainly the beauty that was laid into the great cathedrals of ancient Europe is awe-inspiring, and it was done by the Masons, it was done by the Templars, it was done by people that were trained within the great spiritual mysteries, who laid these secrets into art. And this is what William Henry was talking about earlier. Through the power of art, sacred art, you can see who was an initiate and who was not. You can awaken and activate through hermetics, which is the secret symbol language of the soul. You can activate these awarenesses within yourself. And the great spiritual teachers of the past, Thoth in particular, and his daughter Isis, and her husband Osiris, and their son Horus, the more enlightened group of Anunnaki gods, who really fostered wisdom and taught humanity as children to believe in the divinity that lies within us all, whether we live 80 years or 800,000 years. Those beings knew about these technologies for spiritual enlightenment. They understood about free energy, sustainable energy. They understood how to protect the earth, how to take care of the earth. And it's something that we seem to have forgotten in this crazy race for money, power, sex, and a misuse of energy. We seem to have forgotten the fact that we live on a paradise planet. And this is a critical thing that has got to change. And the only way I think it can change is for us to, and this is why I think the UFOs have arrived. They understand once we discovered atomic energy and nuclear energy, we now have the capacity to destroy ourselves. And if we're allowed to go out into space, we have the capacity to destroy others, to destroy other planets. And in the name of, world civilizing, we become the asshole conquerors, basically. And so this has to stop. It really does. And the more we can be aware of it, and I think we have great allies. I think it's really important for us to realize not only are there spiritual forces like angels and masters and avatars from the fifth dimension, but there are also higher consciousness extraterrestrial races from the third, the fourth, and the fifth dimension. We also have the whole group of beings that live in the inner earth who have been here. They are said to be the remnants of Atlantis and Lemuria long ago, that survived the flood, that were tuned in enough, that have created a completely peaceful civilization with 7 races living inside the inner earth. And this is, really important because they're citizens of this planet like we are. The cabals can say, well, those ETs are not citizens of this planet, but certainly the ones in the inner earth are. And once we started using atomic and nuclear weapons, we started really annoying the dickens out of these guys because this is their planet too. As they said, we allowed you to have your petty wars and we left you alone. But once you start threatening the health of the whole planet, this is not to be allowed. And this is one of the reasons that movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still came out, where that essential message of the ETs coming to visit to say, look, you know, we want you to thrive, but if you continue to threaten the planet, this will not be allowed. This is one of the reasons that message came forward. And it came out in the 50s, and it came at a time where many of you may or may not be aware, our government was approached by very beautiful human fair-haired beings from Venus. They have finer features than us. They tend to have blonde hair, blue, green, gray eyes, sometimes brown eyes, but they have a very advanced culture in Venus. And of course, that's not what we've been taught about Venus. We've been taught that there's 800 degrees Fahrenheit in Venus, and that the pressure is such that it would kill us. Well, if that's so, how did the Russians send a probe with a balloon that was able to land on the surface and give them readings? The pressure of 800 pounds per square inch would have crushed the probe and never even allowed the balloon to descend. So we have been misinformed, and because an advanced civilization lives on Venus, we're not even going over to Venus right now. The cabal's not interested. They're interested in going back to Mars, because that civilization basically was destroyed very slowly over time by the destruction of Tiamat. It took a very long time for the seas to dry up and the atmosphere to leak off, but there are people like my friend Laura Eisenhower who talk about the fact that there are already, at least 1,000 people or more living on Mars in underground bases. The whole idea that we're trying to terraform Mars instead of just taking the time to shift from coal and gas and oil and move to free energy and treat our own planet with respect is utterly ridiculous. I agree with William completely when he talks about if we only took the billions of dollars that we're spending on that and just use some of the free energy devices that have already been created since the time of Nikola Tesla, that have been primarily suppressed by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and these cabal families that really got out of bounds, then we would have a different world. And of course it would decentralize some of their power, but now we know that something like 3% of the world holds something like 94% of the wealth in the world. That means 6% of the world, how does that go? Anyway, the rest of us basically share 6% of the wealth, the other 97%. And it's an imbalanced equation. We all know you can't take it with you. It's what we do now that matters. And I think that we are in a time of vibrational movement where we must remember who we are as divine beings, which is why I wrote this next book that's coming out about the angelic origins of the soul and discovering what we're really doing here and where we've come from. And remembering what our true history has been, that we are star beings, that this planet was seeded by star beings, that we are the remnants. In fact, many times they think of us as the royalty, because we have so many different extraterrestrial races that have contributed to our evolution. It's not just the Anunnaki gods. It's also the Pleiadians and the Syrians and the Lyrans and the Arcturians and many different groups. So we must remember who we are as souls. We must take a look at our ancient past to figure out what is actually true and what we're being fed that is a lie, so that we can see through that, so that 3% that's trying to rule the world can't. And I think, as I said, that the tides of history are with us. There is a vibrational frequency shift coming to this planet that is cosmically sent from the galactic center out to our sun, and the sun is bathing all the planets in the solar system with that frequency. And that frequency is meant to vibrationally awaken us and upgrade us. And the old guard is fighting tooth and nail. So programs like this are fundamental for our awakening, that we spread the word and we have other people that we can turn them on to. And this is why I write the books that I write and why I do the work that I do.